There's a home video of me in my early 20s that I watched not too long ago, and I barely recognized the guy on the screen. The voice was otherworldly, the affect was floaty, and it was those days where I was genuinely waiting for Jesus to split the clouds at any second to take me home. I was so heavenly minded. I don't know how earthly good I was. And so here's the honest question that I've had to sit with for years is what was I actually bypassing? Like what else was going on inside of me? So what is spiritual bypassing? The term comes from psychologist John Welwood, who first described it in the 1980s. He watched people in spiritual communities use meditation, prayer, and elevated language, and I have that, to avoid dealing with unsolved or unresolved, or maybe a little bit of both, emotional wounds, relational patterns, and these developmental gaps that really hadn't been addressed. Not not necessarily intentionally, but functionally. And so the danger is not that it looks wrong. The danger is that it looks exactly right. And a man can speak fluently about Christianity, his union with Christ, and still be reactive in conflict, in patterns, in triggers. A woman can quote scripture day and night about identity and still be shame driven in every relationship. A community can worship with genuine passion on Sunday and gaslight each other by Tuesday. The spiritual language isn't the lie. The bypassing is the lie. So what does this look like in real life? A conversation I witnessed recently stopped me. Uh, Someone online that I'll leave nameless wrote something like, "There are no parts of me that aren't like Jesus. I'm filled with his joy, and the old is gone, and behold the new." And there was more in that exchange, as you might imagine. And I hear the heart in that, and the desire for genuine freedom and union is real and worth honoring. I want to offer caution from what I've seen over the years with this spiritual bypassing business. When we say that there are no parts of us that aren't like Christ in totality, we can start to move away from our actual lived experience. Most of us have, these real parts of our lives that still feel anxious, reactive, ashamed, controlling, or shut down. If that's not you, you can stop the podcast and go listen to something else. But if it is you and you're honest to admit it, those things are there in our lives, not as our core identity, but as our current lived reality. These parts don't transform by being dismissed with mere truth statements. They get quieter on the surface and even stronger underneath. What the mind suppresses, the body stores. Bessel van der Kolk spent decades documenting this in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. The interior life, it doesn't disappear because we've decided theologically that it should. And a one-time encounter with Christ doesn't negate the soul work, the shadow work of bringing the light of Christ into all of those places of the interior mansion. Let me give you a personal example, and I have many. Because I genuinely believe Jesus was coming back imminently, my wife and I had our daughter as soon as we could. We didn't want to arrive in heaven without having done that work of bringing a child into the world. And I'm so grateful that she's here. It's actually her birthday today. And happy birthday. But that eschatology, that belief about the end times, it shaped every single day to every decision I made in a nanosecond. And most of them were made in the avoidance of the present reality that I was actually living in. I even carried a letter in my wallet from my neighbor. I think I still have it in one of my boxes somewhere. And in that little folded up letter in my wallet were instructions for how to proceed after the rapture, because he would find my clothes on the ground after I disappeared. So I laugh about it now, but I want you to hear what was underneath. I was so oriented toward an exit that I was barely present to my actual life. That is spiritual bypassing, the real cost. Here's what bypassing actually costs over time. And I want to name this clearly because I've sat with this in so many men's lives in coaching. Relationships that stay surface level no matter how long they've existed, uh, they'll just stay there because there's no real depth. A man who can preach grace but can't receive it. Yes, blessed pastors. Spiritual experiences that never translate into relational health. This is part of the cost. The slow erosion of credibility when what we profess and how we live keep diverging with that cognitive dissonance. And the loneliness. Oh, the loneliness. The quiet, private loneliness of a life that looks spiritually full, but really feels empty in the places that matter most. I talk to these guys day in and day out. So the longer we bypass, the further the wound travels underground. And what goes underground, it doesn't disappear. It becomes harder to find and harder to heal. That's the real cost. Let's look at a literary mirror. If you know me, I like my characters in my books. They're my friends. Javert in Les Mis. He's the most haunting picture or portrait of spiritual bypassing and maybe all of literature. A man so completely identified with the law. He is consumed and obsessed with absolute moral order that when grace arrives in the form of Jean Valjean's mercy, he can't even integrate it. It destroys him. It throws him into the river Seine rather than living in a world where his categories have been overturned. He just couldn't do it. He was maybe not a villain as so much as a bypasser, a man whose entire identity was built on a system that left no room for the actual complexity of of being human. Dostoevsky. He understood this even before the word existed. And the brothers Karamazov, Father Zosima, he stands in contrast to the monks in the story around him. And these guys were performing holiness beautifully to the letter, and yet they couldn't tolerate that grace looked different than what they were trained for, or what they expected. And then true holiness enters and it doesn't override. It's a beautiful scene from good old Fyodor. Or closer to home, the pastor who preaches grace on Sunday and controls his family through fear all week. Not a hypocrite like in the simple sense, a man who's never let the grace he preaches reach the parts of him that need it most. And that, my friends, is bypassing. Let's look to Jesus. So, Jesus in the scriptures, he didn't bypass the human condition, he entered it. You've heard me say this before. He wept at the grave of Lazarus and didn't just say, you know what, guys, he's in a better place. He wept bitterly, even though he knew what was about to happen. He sweat blood in Gethsemane. He cried out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that is not behavior of a man overriding his interior world with theological identity statements. Thank God. And that's a man fully present to every dimension of being human. Peter Scazzaro, the author, built an entire framework around this and emotionally healthy spirituality. His central observation is it's simple, but it's really devastating. Emotional maturity and spiritual maturity, emotional immaturity and spiritual maturity cannot exist, cannot coexist long term. One will eventually expose the other. Thomas Keating, he saw the same thing in from the contemplative tradition. The false self, the false self doesn't disappear when we have a spiritual experience. It puts on spiritual clothes. That's one way to look at it. So let's look at the way through. I remember being in missionary training school at 18, 19, working hard on becoming holy. I would actually put my Walkman on at night, listen to worship music for like osmosis, just to become like Christ. I didn't want to miss a second. Well, I remember visiting home on one of my breaks, and I came home and I had a conversation with my dad. And I asked my dad, Dad, I want to give you, and I never spoke to him like this before, so he's probably like, what's going on here? Dad, I want to give you permission to speak into my life, call out my blind spots. I want to become more like Jesus. Dad, how can I become more righteous? And I think he was doing something with his hands when I was talking to him, and then like filing something away. And he turned around and looked at me, um, just very frankly, and he said, Jason, can I tell you how to be more like Jesus? I said, Yeah, Dad, tell me. He goes, Well, let's start with this. He said, you are one of the most self-righteous people that I've ever met. I can't even remember anything else he said, but I remember the humility, the humbling of that moment. It was like a dart to my chest. And he was exactly right. And I'm so grateful that he loved me enough to name it. That is what the way through looks like. It's being real, it's being embodied, it's being honest, not overriding. It's not overriding what's actually happening. And so letting someone who loves you name what you cannot see in yourself is part of the way through. Although there's, ways to handle it for sure. It's presence, it's honesty, it's a participation in the process, and to do it with graciousness for sure. But maybe on that day, I needed a tough word. So it looks like being willing to say, in life, I'm a Christ follower. So it's like you can say, I believe today in the finished work of Christ. It's real. It's real. And at the same time, I'm still anxious in conflict and or whatever it is. And both of these things are true at the same time. It looks like what Jesus modeled in Gethsemane, not overriding the fear, but bringing the fear into the Father's presence. And that's the difference between spiritual bypassing and spiritual maturity. In my work with men, this is where the real forge happens. The invitation is not to silence the anxious part or the reactive part or the ashamed part. The invitation is to bring those parts into the heat of honesty, to let them be seen, to let the forge do what the forge does. We are wounded in relationship. We are healed in relationship. This is not earning wholeness. This is how the heartsmith works. The young man in the home videos was not bad. He was sincere. He was blood earnest. He loved Jesus genuinely, and he did a lot of good. He was also using the rapture as an exit strategy from the present moment to some degree, from his own unresolved places, from the harder and slower work of becoming. I'm more interested now in what it means to be fully here, fully present, fully human, not to be whisked away, but willing to be formed. Saint Irenaeus said, "The glory of God as a human being, fully alive." Jesus didn't come to help us just escape the human condition. He came to redeem it from the inside. That's the invitation, not bypassing, entering. Where in your life are you using spiritual language to avoid rather than engage? And what would it look like to bring that place into honest relationship with God rather than override it? If this resonates with you and you want to explore what integration actually looks like in your own life, that is exactly what we do in Heartsmith Coaching. My book, Jesus Comforts, is available now. Signed copies can be ordered at jasontwombly.com. Until next time, shape the heart, forge the man.